I've been asked or invited, and it's always an honor if you're invited to pour the libations before we begin any proceedings. And let me just say that why would we pour libations? We pour libations because it is a tradition that gives us a moment to remember. It is a tradition that allows us a moment to remember all those who have gone before and who have brought us to where we are now. And that is, when we remember, we're not just going to remember those people who were outstanding heroes and heroines whose names we can remember, but we must always remember as well those elders in our own families who, without the sacrifices, we would not be here today. And when we pour libation, we teach our children to do the same. We say, when you come together to engage in some task, take a moment and remember all of those who have gone before you, so that we don't have our children thinking that they have reached where they are without anyone's sacrifice. How many times have you heard people say, boy, is me alone? Yes? If it weren't for me, I wouldn't be here. Impossible. And the tradition of pouring libation, and there's a brilliant book by a brother, Dr. Kimani Nehusi. He's Guyanese originally, but has been living in London and teaching abroad. Now he's moved over to the University of Maryland, just on the issue of the way in which libations are poured across the African continent. Brilliant piece of work he's done. So I pour these libations, and when I do so, and we call on the names of our ancestors and our own memories of our own, those who have passed before us, we get a moment to pause and call those names. I'm going to ask you to just say one word in our African language. And that one word is Ashe. Can you say Ashe?
Ashe.
Ashe. And what does Ashe mean? Ashe means, may it be done. May it happen. May it happen. So we will say, we will call the names of our ancestors and ask that they guide us, in our, whatever our tasks are before us, but also the task at hand tonight. May they guide us so that we can grow in wisdom, so that we can share between us ideas and receive those ideas well. May that happen. And I will ask Ashe, and you can say Ashe. 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 That is our first. And we do so, and we begin by asking, of course, our ancestors, and because we are in the path of emancipation, I will speak to those ancestors who have taken us along that path. And so I call on our ancestors such as, and I have to start with a woman, I'm sorry, there's a bias, Nani from Jamaica. Do you know that wonderful woman, Nani? So I asked Nani to also be one of those guides that's near us, that gives us that spirit to be able to receive and to share this evening these messages about our future as a people. Ashe? Ashe. 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 I also would like to call on that great freedom fighter, Marcus Mosiah Garvey. You know, we can hardly do anything in this part of the world without talking about Marcus Mosiah Garvey. And so I ask him as well to be in the room with us and to guide us, his spirit to guide us. Ashe. 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 There's also a tremendous woman, again, my bias, Ya Asantewa. I was speaking to some children at NAPS, girls, Naprima High School, and they were sitting all on the floor in front of me, and I said to them, you know what? There was a time when our elders were all sitting just as you are sitting now, and they were trying to decide how were they going to defeat the British, because they had snatched the chief from the great Asante Hina out of their midst, and were heading to steal what is to them the spiritual stool. And it was a young girl sitting in the back of the room who stood up and said, we have to fight. And if our chiefs were alive today, we would all fight. And her speech was so moving, she stirred her people to engage in a war that lasted how many years? 100 years. Ashe. Ashe. So we ask her spirit to also be with us and to guide us. And there are others of our own in Trinidad and Tobago who have walked the path of Pan-Africanism and borne the struggle of keeping the memory of our ancestors alive, such as more recently our own Kwame Ture, who has passed, and others, and I won't go. I will ask you now to take a moment and call the names. Call first the names that the community can speak to and remember. Would anyone like to call the name of someone in your own community, from your own community here in Tobago that you'd like to remember, that could guide us? Please call the name. Ashe. Ashe. J.D. Elder. Elder. Ashe. Elder taught us in Trinidad and Tobago to undertake the libation.
Tamori.
Ashe. Ashe.
A.N.R. Robinson.
Ashe. Ashe. May his spirit guide us.
Evans Phillips.
Ashe. Ashe.
Edward Hernandez.
Ashe. And now I ask you to just pause and call the names of your own family members who have gone before you, who have brought you to where you are here and given you the strength and the guidance to give you that strength to make you who you are. And that's important as well.
Ariel Pagan.
Mama Sarah. My mother.
Alfred Gray.
Ashe. Ashe.
Ariel Lewis.
Ashe. Ashe.
Great Grand Teresa.
Ashe.
Ashe.
Jill Murray. Ashe. Ashe. So I think the room is full with those who are seen and those who are unseen. And you know it is our tradition that the belief that they are all with us. They're all with us. We walk around with a lot of spirits with us. And so when you have that many spirits with us, your strength is greater than you alone, you know? That's why the old stickman would say when he was about to fight, you know that chant that says, is me one, 10,000 against me one? He didn't feel he was alone. That's the chant. Okay, thank you very much. And let's enjoy.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is, as Laureen would have said, my name is Heather Gray, and I am a librarian at the Scarborough Library. I would also like to say that I am one of the members of the team who sits down and comes up with the lectures for our lecture series 2019, a task that is very pleasurable. It is tasking, but pleasurable. Right? So today it is my pleasure and privilege to welcome you to our 7th event in our 2019 monthly lecture series. This program has been the brainchild of the Tobago Writers Guild and the Tobago Library Services. Over the time, we have encouraged its nurturing by various community members and groups, since we ascribe to the tradition that it takes a community to raise a child, even a brainchild. As such, the topics that we have thus far have been great, we have had thus so far, have been greatly informed and inspired by the interests expressed or demonstrated by recognized community reps or bodies. This month is no exception. In keeping with our continued enthusiasm for celebrating and exploring our cultural legacy through the annual hosting of the Tobago Heritage Festival, we saw reparation as a pertinent topic to select. Added to which, it has been a topic on the radar in one way or the other within recent times. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I'm going to confess that I have had to stay mindful of an inclination I seem to have in saying repatriation instead of reparation. And yes, I had to, it really confused me, the fact that I was tempted to keep saying repatriation. In further remonstrating with myself, I had to be careful not to make this slip up when I came to do my bit this evening. And I thought of a Freudian slip. The thought came to me. And then I said maybe the two concepts were one and the same, or the same, linked by some, maybe the historical implications that they had for us. But, that's another time. We could probably have that discussion. Reparation can be a very narrow or very wide subject as we wish to make it. And this evening, I'm sure you share my interest in hearing Brother Khafra Kambon, head of the Emancipation Support Committee, how he would treat this subject as he speaks to us on the topic, reparations, self-repair. So I take this opportunity to welcome Brother Kambon and Mrs. Kambon to Tobago. I understand that it would have been somewhat challenging for you today due to airline issues, but we are very happy to have you and we welcome you. Thank you very much.
All right, we move on now to another cultural item, the Mason Hall Village Council folk performers again. So we invite them on stage. The Mason Hall Village Council folk performers. invite Mr. Sean Bigard Hutchinson to come forward and introduce our featured speaker, and then he will direct him to the mic.
Thank you, Ms. Morris Phillip. Welcome to everyone, brothers and sisters, comrades, friends. On behalf of the martyrs, the fallen soldiers, the ancestors, I welcome you to the Ann Mitchell Gift Auditorium tonight for this latest in our lecture, the Tobago Library Services and Tobago Writers Guild lecture series, where we'll be discussing reparations. I'm not a specialist on reparations. My emotions and my instinct tells me that we are due reparations, but I think Mr. Kambon will elucidate further on the question for our enlightenment. So, our guest this evening, I hope that most of us are aware of him, know of his reputation, know of his work, know of his contribution over several decades in Trinidad and Tobago. Our guest, Mr. Kambon, is a stalwart of the ongoing struggle for empowerment in Trinidad and Tobago. In my opinion, he's been in the vanguard of the movement to consolidate the nation-building project that was established formally in 1962 and which has been an ongoing initiative since that time. So I think our guest, since he became known as a leading light in the Trinidad and Tobago expression of a global campaign, a global initiative for rights, for empowerment, which shook the world. And the reverberations right here in Trinidad and Tobago, I think, were some of which Mr. Kambon was in the vanguard and in the front line for those struggles. And he remains on the front line, I believe, of those struggles. Mr. Kambon's wife, when she poured libation, she mentioned some figureheads. And I believe that Mr. Kambon is on the pantheon, you might say, of some of those figureheads, some of whom have been mentioned already. Kwame Ture, those from Trinidad and Tobago or from the region, like Kwame Ture, also known as Stokely Carmichael, Elmer Francois, going back even further, Tubal Uriah Buzz Butler, Henry Sylvester Williams, one of the founders of the Pan-African movement. In my opinion, Mr. Kambon walks the path of those friends, of those stalwart figures in our struggle. Just to give a little bit of information about him, he's been the chair of the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago since 1992. He's a regional coordinator of Caribbean Pan-African Network, which is linked to the diaspora initiative of the African Union, with which he has been associated and linked for several years, serving on several regional and Africa itself committees. He's a winner of the Trinidad and Tobago Chaconia Medal in recognition of his work over the years, and he's the author of this book, Bread, Justice and Freedom, a political biography of George Weeks. I think it should be on sale at the back. If it isn't, I think it should be. I should say, just in passing, when I was a youth growing up in London, we were aware of Paul Keynes Douglas, we were aware of Sparrow, we were aware of Kitchener, we were aware of some of the writers coming out of Trinidad and Tobago and out of the Caribbean, but many of us weren't aware or knowledgeable about the political economy or the political situation in the Caribbean in the contemporary sense, in a recent sense. And this is one of the books that helped me to understand more from afar whilst living in London about what was going on in Trinidad and Tobago. So it's an honor for me to introduce to you tonight, brothers and sisters, Khafra Kambon. Please give him a warm welcome.
Good evening, my elders, brothers and sisters, all of you who have come out for this occasion. And let me say all protocols observed, because I don't want to call names and miss out very important people who may be here and whom I don't recognize. So this evening, we're going to be on a very important topic. I'm sorry we got the songs a little mixed up there, because I really wanted you to hear a song that goes back to the 60s with a group called the Staple Singers. And that song, basically it was saying, asking the question, when will we be paid for all the wrong we've been done? So that sounds like it now.
When will we be paid for the work we've done? When will we be paid for the work we've done? We have worked this country from shore to shore. Our women cooked all your food and washed all your clothes. We picked all your cotton and laid the railroad steel. Worked our hands to the bone. That's your lumber mill. I say, when will we be paid for the work we've done? When will we be paid for the work we've done? We fought in your wars in every land to keep this country free, all for women, children, and men. But anytime we ask for pay alone, that's when everything seemed to turn out wrong. We've been beat up, called names, shot down and stoned. And every time we do right, someone say wrong. When will we be paid for the work we've done? When will we be?
Yeah, I don't need to talk again, because that's the whole message, and that is not even the whole song. But that is the beauty of our artists. You see how the drummers made us feel this afternoon? They built up our spirits, and they built up the spirits in the room and prepared us, and then we heard it vocalized there. So our artists are so much a part of what is important to us, and they have a way of putting it over that people like myself can't. So let me say thank you to the Writers Guild for inviting me to speak on the topic you see there, reparations and self-repair. Thanks to the Mason Hall folk performers, and of course thanks to our host, the library, for this space. And I'm very impressed with what I've seen and heard of the Writers Guild so far, but now we get on to the topic of reparations. And we got it from a singing group. Now we move, I think I have the control here. Let's see if it works. Oh, yes. Now, this is a picture from July 2013. And in July 2013, I saw something that I never expected to. I didn't think that CARICOM governments would come together and take a unanimous decision to engage in the battle for reparations. I must say it took me by surprise, but very pleasant surprise, that decision was taken. And now, to give you a well put over definition of reparations, I would move to one of the persons whom I greatly admired, and you would know the name Malcolm X. And let me read to you how Malcolm X explained this question of reparations. He said, the words of Malcolm X, "If you are the son of a man who had a wealthy estate, and you inherit your father's estate, you have to pay off the debts that your father incurred before he died. The only reason that the present generation of white Americans are in a position of economic strength is because their fathers worked our fathers for over 400 years with no pay. We were sold from plantation to plantation like you sell a horse or a cow or a chicken or a bushel of wheat. All that money is what gives the present generation of American whites the ability to walk around the earth with their chest out like they have some kind of economic ingenuity. And then he concludes, your father isn't here to pay. My father isn't here to collect. But I am here to collect, and you are here to pay. That is how Malcolm X very simply put over the issue of reparations. Now, we come closer to the present time. And Malcolm X was very sound on the principle of reparations, because that is in essence, what he said embodies the essence of what it would be. But at the same time, people would say, well, okay, one generation to the next. Your father, take my father property, you have to pay me when you inherit that property. But what about when you apply the principle many generations later? And that is what we are dealing with when we address the question of reparations. But the first thing I want to point out, when you talk to people about reparations, they say, but that happened so long ago. Say, how long? About 400 years ago. That is the feeling that we have. But what we endured, what our people endured, is not that long ago. That whole idea of this 400 years ago is a false notion. Enslavement was happening 400 years ago. That is enslavement of African people. It was even happening 500 years ago. But it didn't stop 400 or 500 years ago. Right? In the English-speaking Caribbean, it only ended 181 years ago. And when you go to Cuba, which the Spanish ruled, it only ended in 1886. And in Brazil, which was the last of them in the region, 1888. So let us see how far away that is. I have a combination of gray hair and no hair. But it doesn't mean that I'm ancient. And my own birth took place. I was born 61 years after slavery ended in the Caribbean. 59 years after it ended in Brazil. That is how close it is. I was born so soon after slavery ended, after the 400 to 500 year run. So I have lived longer than the gap in time between my birth and the end of slavery in our region, because I'm on the other side of those numbers. A few days ago, Danny Glover, again I'm on this question of how far away it is. I'm sure most of you saw him testifying before the US Congress. And at one point he almost broke down and cried, because in his testimony he spoke about his grandmother whom he knew, who lived in their home. And she was a person who had been enslaved. in the United States, because Danny Glover is in the United States. And that is how close it is. That is how close that experience is. Recently, in 2016, John Daniel's Whiskey, a company that produces John Daniel's Whiskey, the #1 whiskey in the United States, for the first time admitted that John Daniels did not create that whiskey. Jack Daniels, did not create that whiskey. It was a master distiller whose name was Nearest Green. Sometimes they write it as Nearest Green because, you know, our names did not matter. And the reason why he had a surname Green is because he was so-called owned by a man called Green before he was handed over to Daniels. And you know what? His descendants, up to today, still work for the Jack Daniels family. They're still on the same, well, you wouldn't call it a plantation, again, out of a sense of decency, but they still work there. And it is only so long after that it has been publicly acknowledged that Nearest Green was the one responsible for that famous whiskey. But reparations for slavery, even if we say how far it was, and this is where we come to a picture like this. I think you recognize the persons in the picture. That woman in the white, still the Queen of England. And this picture was taken in Barbados in 1966. And she was storing with her cousin and touring his estate in Barbados, which had been handed down from slavery. It's an estate in Barbados, handed down from slavery. And in 1966, she was storing that estate. Now, we know that there's some distance, even though I've tried to close that gap that people have in their minds. But you see, international law recognizes reparations. And the term is applied at the collective level. When you're talking about compensation that's due, reparations, you're talking at the collective level. And it is due to populations. Well, in the case of CARICOM, we talk specifically about reparations for the indigenous people and African descendants. And it is really, a lot of it is a transaction between states and peoples. International law defines reparation, and this is the words of the International Court of Justice, because people would want to know if there's a basis in law for that battle for reparations. There is a basis in law. The only obstacle is the power equation. But when it comes to law, the Court of International Justice, which was the predecessor of what today is called the International Court of Justice, spoke about reparations this way. The essential principle is that reparation must, as far as possible, wipe out all the consequences of the illegal act and re-establish the situation which would, in all probability, have existed if that act had not been committed. That was the international pronouncement on reparations as law in 1928. Now, what are the legal preconditions for reparations. The first one is that the wrong that has been committed must be a wrong on a level that is considered a crime against humanity. And chattel slavery is recognized as such by the United Nations World Conference Against Racism in 2001. And it has been so acknowledged by a number of European countries. And once there's a definition that it is a crime against humanity, there is no legal statute bar, as the lawyers call it. Now, let us check out a former US President, George Bush, to hear what he has to say on the matter and find out if he thinks it was a crime against humanity. George, could you speak to us? Oh, well, okay, we're done with that already. We move on to, is meter change? I hope I haven't changed anything in the meantime. Yes, all right. Okay, let's hear George. He's talking at Goree Island, one of the
At
slave
this place, liberty and life were stolen and sold. Human beings were delivered and sorted and weighed and branded with the marks of commercial enterprises and loaded as cargo on a voyage without return. One of the largest migrations of history was also one of the greatest crimes of history.
Okay, I think we could stop there.
Below
George
the
Bush has
depths.
made the point. He's made a very clear point there that it was one of the greatest crimes of history. So if anything could be defined as a crime against humanity, that has to be one of those things. Now, I want to go to another authority. We don't need to hear, it's just a little more Bush, but we don't really need to hear it. So let me go to, I gone too far? Yes. Oh. All right. I like to quote the white authorities on this because I think it's so good to hear it, because this is Winston Churchill, the former Prime Minister of Britain, 1940 to 45 and 51 to 55. And hear what he had to say. And now you would understand, because another one of the conditions is that the descendants of the victims continue to suffer from the effects of it. And the others continue to prosper. So did they prosper based on our enslavement? And here is Winston Churchill. Our possession of the West Indies gave us the strength, the support, but especially the capital, the wealth, at a time when no other European nation possessed such a reserve, which enabled us, we British, to come through the great struggles of the Napoleonic Wars, the keen competition of commerce in the 18th and 19th centuries, and enabled us not only to acquire the appendage of possessions which we have, but also to lay the foundations of that commercial and financial leadership which, when the world was young, when everything outside Europe was underdeveloped, enabled us to make our great position in the world. So if you want to know if the criminals benefited and continue to benefit, we take their words for it. So crime against humanity, it benefited. At the same time, African civilizations collapsed. So you have the beneficiaries who can up to today, most of the benefits, you had the collapse of African civilizations, and it is reflected in the decline of population. So I'm just going to tell you what happened to population in that period. The population of Europe increased from 103 million in 1650, and these figures come from a UNESCO conference in 1978. These were the estimates of demographers from all over the world. So the population of Europe increased from 103 million in 1650 to 274 million in 1850. The population of the 18 provinces of China proper increased from 113 million in 1650 to 350 million in 1850. And that of India grew from 100 million in 1600 to 255 million in 1871. During the same period, however, the population of tropical Africa, as almost all modern studies show, either declined absolutely or at best remained stagnant. So you just look at from the evidence that population growth or stagnation or decline tells us about what happened, the kind of disaster, the maafa that took over our continent of Africa. So when we come to look at what has happened in the world, there is plenty of existing evidence. You had the decline of so many great civilizations. I wonder if I have the slide to show you something on that here. I think I have that. I think that's, it might come in. No, we're not ready for that yet. We will show you a bit of that. I will show you a bit of that later on. But just remember that the population decline was a result of the destruction of civilization on the continent of Africa. Now the other question is, do the descendants of the victims, because this is the other condition for reparations, if the descendants of the victims of that period continue to suffer from the effects? And I am saying that they certainly do, economically, emotionally, and even beyond that, at the deepest psychic levels. Post-slavery policies, practices, and law, because part of why we still suffer is because so many things after slavery combined to perpetuate the crime. And it is still being perpetuated by power and control and the way it is exercised in the world today. A power and control that derived from the enslavement of our people. So that the way the world has been turned upside down with Europe on top. The last Oxfam report, Oxfam does a report on inequality in the world on an annual basis. And the last Oxfam report pointed out that global wealth inequality widened last year, that would be 2018, and you now have a situation where 43 people at the top have as much wealth, the 43 richest people in the world, have as much wealth as the combined wealth of the 3.8 billion people at the bottom. Less people than we have in this room have between them more wealth than 3.8 billion people. Those who are the at the bottom. That is the extent of inequality in the world today. In fact, they point out that the billionaires last year increased their fortunes by $2.5 billion per day. Per day. Now, the way in which the structure of the world has changed, you have Europe at the top, and to the very bottom, you have Africans. So let us look at some pictures. This is from Forbes magazine. Every year they publish a report on the world's billionaires. So here you have the first 20. Nobody looks like us. You have the next 20. Nobody looks like us. The next 20, nobody looks like us. So we reach 60. The next 20, nobody looks like us. We reach 80. The next 20, nobody looks like us. That's the first 100. Where we are now, the 120, nobody looks like us. Oh, I've gone back. I've gone too far. But if we go beyond that, we have to reach 138. That's where we first appear, because we hear about this richest man, richest African, Dangote. He is number 138. 136, right? And then you have to go again. There was no point putting all of them on the board before you get the next one at about 196. And in the first 1,000, there are 3 of us. When you talk about the wealthiest people in the world. That is where we stand in the world today. And you compare that with what it was before the transatlantic slave trade. And that is a quote from the BBC. If you can't read it, let me read it for you. It says, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos is the quote in here is the richest man in the world according to the 2019 Forbes billionaires list released this week. With an estimated fortune of $131 billion, he is the wealthiest man in modern history. But, and this is BBC, he is by no means the richest man of all times. That title is believed to belong to Mansa Musa, whom you see in the picture there, the 14th century West African ruler. Right? So we don't have to worry about the other things about Mansa Musa. That's the point I want to make. So here is what has happened to the world between the 14th century and the century in which we lived. That a man, an African of the 14th century, was wealthier if you take that time's wealth as it's calculated and our modern wealth, and he is considered to be the wealthiest man who ever lived. And it ain't coming from crazy Africanists like myself. That is a BBC is accepting, is giving us that judgment. All right. Now, let me see what. Let us look at the process that put us there. Coming from Mansa Musa to Dangote. Look at the comparison between our wealthy and the wealthy of today. And the thing about it is that the effects are not only material, they're also psychological. And when we look at some of these things, we would see. This monument is called the Tree of Forgetfulness. And it's on the road to the sea in Benin. This is exactly where, Benin was very heavy slave trading point in Africa. And those monuments you see there represent something that was called the Tree of Forgetfulness. And there was a ritual which Africans in chains and branded were forced to perform before they were boarded the ships. And they had to walk around the tree. If there was males, walk around this tree, was an actual tree, 9 times. That is supposed to make them forget who they are, make them forget their past. And it's a disease that has come down to today. But they had this 9 times. For women, 8 times. Maybe that is why the women brighter than the men today. Because they only did it. They only went around the tree 8 times. Now the thing about reparations is that, or the thing about enslavement and its effects on the human being is not only the material question, To me, the material question today is in a way the secondary challenge. And this is why I talk about reparations and self-repair. Because the only way we are going to overcome the material challenge is when psychologically we are geared to put up the battle we need to put up, to win that battle, and to really go through a healing process that we need to go through. It was always said, if you look at Africans, you look at our collective behavior, we see a lot of things that are wrong, and people try to attribute it to historical causes. And what is said? You're making excuses. You're making excuses. Everything you make an excuse. Slavery finished, back to what I said before, so long ago, and all of that. And we don't understand the effects of untreated trauma. And I want to compare how the Jews dealt with their experience to how we deal with ours. Because, some people who were in the concentration camps were freed. And now their children and then their grandchildren. And what they notice is that behaviors, negative behaviors, are far more prevalent among those descendants of the persons who were in the concentration camps than the persons who might have been in Europe when the Germans were putting them in the concentration camps. So those who came out of the concentration camps, they have to figure out now why it is that the behaviors of their descendants, their children, their grandchildren, and so, are different from others. And so therefore, what that is suggesting is that trauma can be transferred intergenerationally. So if I undergo severe trauma, it passes on to my children. Not all would be, but too many would suffer the effects of that trauma. And therefore the question was asked, is this passed on culturally in the sense that because I have gone through a trauma, my behaviors, the things I communicate consciously and unconsciously and so on, affect the child? So is it transferred culturally from generation to generation, or is it transferred genetically as well? And so the Jews didn't treat things like we treat our own who are in difficulty and think about whether or not we are affected by trauma in some way that we need to address in order to resolve the challenges that we have as a people. They decided they're going to investigate it at all levels. And that included looking at the genes and comparing a certain gene in those children who were in difficulty with the genes of those who were not. And what they found is that there was an alteration of a particular gene that they found. And some of that research was done in a university hospital in the United States and so on. So what is more significant about this to me is the approach. We are so convinced about our own inferiority and how low our own self-esteem that if we see problems, it's just like even the problems today. There are certain communities that are in real crisis in Trinidad and Tobago. What is the answer? Let Gary shoot them. You know, the thing is that we don't have, we're not in a frame of mind that says, if a problem is too prevalent, there's a cause. You have to analyze the causes, you have to diagnose it. And you see, this is part of reparations, but this is the part that nobody can do for you. That is why part of reparations is self-repair. So when we think of reparations and self-repair, because this is the part of it where we begin to analyze ourselves and see what's happening. Now, I'm going to let you sort of feel this thing. That's a monument under the sea in Grenada. Goree Island, where Bush spoke.
Side by side, my people stripped of pride and ripped of dignity, from sea to shining sea. Young sister with her child, for 3 months she ain't smiled, till she jumped overboard in the year of their Lord. If the ocean had a voice, what a story she would tell. Millions promise heaven, delivered into hell. If the ocean had a voice, what a story she would tell. Millions promise heaven, delivered into hell.
Okay. So we get a sense from the song and the images of you know, what a massive effect that something of that kind would have.
My heart bled a little when I read those words. I could never have guessed that my first job out of school would be so powerful in and of itself, and that it would propel me to be such an image of hope in the same way that the women of the color purple were to me. I remember a time when I too felt unbeautiful. I put on the TV and only saw pale skin. I got teased and taunted about my night-shaded skin. And my one prayer to God, the miracle worker, was that I would wake up lighter-skinned. The morning would come and I would be so excited about seeing my new skin that I would refuse to look down at myself until I was in front of a mirror because I wanted to see my fair face first. And every day I experienced the same disappointment of being just as dark as I had been the day before. I tried to negotiate with God. I told him I would stop stealing sugar cubes at night if he gave me what I wanted. I would listen to my mother's every word, sitting right there, and never lose my school sweater again if he just made me a little lighter. But I guess God was unimpressed with my bargaining chips because he never listened. And when I was a teenager, my self-hate grew worse. As you can imagine, happens with adolescence. My mother reminded me often that she thought I was beautiful. But that was no consolation. She's my mother. Of course she's supposed to think I'm beautiful.
Now, I want you to, before I move to the other slide, try to guess in your minds, that is a well-known person in today's world. Very, very well-known, who is speaking there. And I want you to try to guess who it is. I don't know if you might have picked up the voice, because it's a voice you'd have heard in different contexts. But it would be interesting if you could think of who that person was. And I think you'd find it hard to believe. Lupita, who said that? All right, all right. Did you pick up the voice, or are you familiar with this? You don't know, all right. She's absolutely correct. Now she's considered one of the most beautiful women in the world. But you see, her crisis, which she faced growing up, is the crisis that so many of us face. And she was fortunate to get a break in life that made her realize that she was more than what other people told her she was. And we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing in the education system so that we could change our children's view of themselves? Because we are part of the reparations process. What are we doing about that? And I'll tell you how in simple ways these things are strengthened. We were doing some classes with students in a school in Laventille. And a classroom that I went into, I was quite impressed when I went into that classroom in one respect, and very disheartened in another. Because the teacher was obviously a person, and when I went, she wasn't there. I was dealing with a class. We used to use another classroom in the school for the lessons. This is the first time we were using that classroom. I don't know who the teacher is. I suspect it's a female teacher, because of the kind of care and attention to things. And she had a lot of pictures on the wall. And I don't know if they were her paintings, because it's not like photographs. It's paintings, it's artwork. And she had them all around the wall. And there was one with a little girl sitting down, and this was one of the biggest ones, with a book in her hand. And the cover of the book read, "Reading makes me beautiful." Now, I want you to guess the color and ethnicity of the child who was being made beautiful by reading. Anybody to take a guess? Was a white child with blue eyes. So here she's trying to give a positive message. I wish I knew her so I could talk to her, but she's trying to give a positive message. But within the positive message that reading, about reading, it is also giving a negative message about self. And it is undermining that child's sense of self. And that is why that child, those children could be just like Lupita. Beautiful children, but believing that they are ugly because they don't have the long hair, the golden hair, the blue eyes, and all those characteristics. Now, this is what I spoke about already, this intergenerational transfer of trauma, and this is part of that story about what took place with the Jews that I spoke about already, so we move from that. Now, the question of what we learn about ourselves, because we consciously and unconsciously have absorbed a certain narrative about ourselves. That here it is, we were savages in Africa, barely civilized, if civilized at all, and all of that. And the Europeans came and, you know, and they civilized us. Okay, they beat us a bit, they beat us up a bit, they make us work for nothing and all that. But we have so much to be thankful for. And this actor, Morgan Freeman, he actually said, he went to do some movie in Africa, and when he came back, he said, after going to Africa, I don't believe they forced my forbearance on the ships. I believe they jumped on the ships. And that was his judgment about the Africa he saw. I have been to Africa several times. Absolutely beautiful. So Morgan Freeman and I have different eyes for some reason. And not because Africa doesn't have severe problems. There are severe problems. But the same reason we have problems are the same reason that our mother continent has problems. It's the same enemy who has been destroying us and continues to do so on both sides of the Atlantic. But one of my most emotional experiences in Africa is going to visit one of the castles. And that door, that iron door you see there, over the wooden door, that was an area called, was a particular cell that they had for those who behaved, who they figure were misbehaving. And anybody would misbehave under the conditions that they were held. First, you were captured by force. Then you put into this large room, well, it's all concrete walls, almost airless because you have the high holes up at the top and all of that, and the wind that would come through the cell bars, and you were locked in there often for months at a time while they waited for the slave ship to come. And I would tell you something about that room is that it's something I've never gotten out of my head. Because when I went there, this was a room that was only cleaned out after the last slave voyage from Ghana. That room was only cleaned out in the 1970s or 1980s. And you still had a mark about 1.5 feet high on the wall. And that mark was from our feces, from our urine, our vomit, and everything that we were forced to stay in for months awaiting the slave ship. And it was packed with straw as well. So it was a combination of straw and feces and everything else that accumulated to that height with human beings living there. And if you protested against those conditions, they put you in the condemned cell. No light, no air, you got no food, no water, and you were left there until you died. Because you could do nothing else but die in that space. And that was, of course, right next to the space where people were living under the conditions that I described. You know, and then right above it, right above that cell, they set up a museum at that spot. And when I went to that museum, the first plaque in that museum was as bad as the cells because of what it said. And I don't have the writing before me, but virtually it said, well, what a good relationship. And this written by Ghanaians, or written for them, they put it up. What a good relationship they had with the British and the other colonizers. You had the Dutch and others who came there as well and so on. They say, no, it was just, slavery was just what? A shadow. a little shadow over a relationship that so much came out of education, you know, agriculture. You know, it's as though Africans then used to eat before they got there. I mean, everything in their society, Christianity, everything, you know, everything was so you get more of a praise song to the European. Now, I went back there last year. That sign is still there, but it's no longer the only sign. They have put up some other signs that are a little balancing, but that still remains one of the signs on the wall. And it is something that I had spoken about. I got in touch with a former minister of culture and so on, and I told him how sickening it was and all of that. And I don't know at what point they put up the other signs, but it is all part of the whole sickness. You see that narrative, and that is the narrative in our minds. There's a certain narrative of history in our minds that makes us see our current condition in a particular light. And it is one of the challenges we have to overcome in the battle for reparations. Because we got to feel it in our soul. We got to really want it because we feel we have been wronged. If we don't feel we have been wronged, if we feel like Freeman, that we benefited from it, or the people who put up that sign, that it was so much benefit, then we don't have the psychic energy to fight for reparations. And it's going to take a tremendous of energy to fight for reparations. So I want to come to the final section now. Can we win the reparations battle? And it has had a long history of movement on the ground, right? In the United States, since the early 50s, the Nation of Islam was, promoting the idea of reparations. And it is all over the place. It is all over the place now. So right now we have a changing political climate about reparations. The first, and I will show you why we are on the road to victory. Because the first intergovernmental conference on reparations was held. You had a lot of civil society organizations before, but the first intergovernmental conference on reparations was held by the Organization of African Unity, which is now the African Union, then was the Organization of African Unity, in 1992. And a major outcome of that is that a group of eminent persons, 10 eminent persons as they call them, and it included Dudley Thompson from Jamaica, the prominent Jamaican lawyer, were this group of eminent persons. But the person who was a key instigator and organizer of the conference paid a price for it. It was Moshood Abiola. And the conference was in 1992. In 1993, he ran for elections and won the presidency of Nigeria. And he never got one day to be president. He was put into prison. And there was constant protest in Nigeria, and globally people were protesting. This is President Abiola. The man has won a free and fair election. Why should he be in prison? Under pressure, 5 years later, he was going to be released. He never came out of the prison alive. On the day he was to be released, well, they make it all casual and so on because he's going home. So he used to have a food taster with him, that person. Somehow they arranged that that person would not be in the room this time because he had a thing where one of the privileges he had was that somebody would taste before he ate or drank anything. He had someone who would do that for him. So they give the guy the day off, because this is freedom time for President Abiola. And security is lax, apparently. And he gets a visit from some Americans. And one of them is Susan Rice. and they are all having tea. I will never drink Susan Rice tea. Anytime you see that brand, leave me out. Because Susan Rice hands him a cup of tea, and before he's finished drinking that tea, he's a dead man. Or almost dead, and they rush him to hospital, and he dies. So there's a lot of controversy over that, because of course the Americans would swear all of them drink the same tea, and he's the only one who died. So it's a precondition, because this was a massive heart attack, and we'll never know the truth of that, but no African today believes that Abiola died from natural causes. So that was the first conference. But after that, you have seen some changes taking place. And I see the slide on the board now. We have reached the point where reparations has now come to the United States Congress. But you know, that is kind of late based on what has been happening. And we'll come to them, but before we come to them, I want to tell you some of the developments that tell us that there's a certain momentum. Massive obstacles, but look at the momentum. In 2001, so we have Abiola there. That's Abiola up in the corner there drinking a cup of tea. I can't swear that's the cup, but here he's drinking a cup of tea. And now we come to this woman here, right? And her name is Tobira. She is, I forget what part of our region she is from, but she has risen to be a member of the French Parliament. That is how high she has risen. And in 2001, the French Parliament passed a law called the Tobira Law, because she's the one who brought it to the Parliament. And the Tobira Law, I'll tell you what the contents of that law are. And this passed by the French Parliament in 2001. So Abiola lost his life in 98, but in 2001, Tobira Law in the name of a black woman. And it says, the French Republic recognizes both the transatlantic and Indian Ocean Negro, forgive the word I'm reading from the document, Negro slave trade on the one hand and slavery itself on the other, that were practiced from the 15th century in the Americas, the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, etc., against African, Amerindian, Malagasy, and Indian populations as constituting crimes against humanity. Now, when you talk about a crime against humanity, the punishment for that, there's no statute bar. It is not like this happened so long ago, and it's statute barred. And the French Parliament is pronouncing that chattel slavery a crime against humanity in this Tobira Law. Article 2, and this is critical for us because the way the French would implement this, it would not be what we need. But it says school curricula and research projects in the fields of history and the human sciences with accord to the subjects of the, again, not my word, Negro slave trade and slavery, the important place they deserve. But you notice it's the slave trade and slavery. It has nothing to do with the greatness of African civilization. And Article 3, a petition will be introduced in the European Council, international organizations, and the United Nations, requesting that the transatlantic and Indian Ocean slave trades be acknowledged as crimes against humanity. And that is one of the preconditions for reparations, that the injury, the wrong, is defined as a crime against humanity. So it remains silent on reparations, but it has laid the legal basis for reparations. In 2016, the Council of Europe, now that's a higher council than the French thing now, published a report which called on the French authorities to open up the debate to move forward on the issues of reparations. So here it is, and they also recommended that they do so in consultation with civil society. So that is the Council of Europe now in 2016. In the United States, on the 18th of June 2009, the US Senate formally passed an apology resolution acknowledging the, quote, fundamental injustice, cruelty, brutality, and inhumanity of slavery and Jim Crow laws. But they also had a paragraph in it saying, nothing in this resolution authorizes or supports any claim against the United States or serves as a settlement of any claim against the United States. In other words, they want to leave reparations out of it. But the implications of what they have admitted will haunt them. And as we saw before, that HR 40 and so are getting closer to victory. And it is interesting in the United States today that in the current presidential race, a number of candidates are saying they are for reparations. Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Tulsi Gabbard, and Julian Castro. 1, 2, 3, 4. Could you imagine 5 candidates for the US presidency saying they are for reparations, right? And Bernie Sanders on the sidelines, but he says he's prepared to sign a reparations study bill. So he kind of halfway there because he still won the black vote, right? But you see, these are examples, and then, as I said, 2013, you had the formation of the Caribbean reparations body. And forget the people who tell you too much time has passed and you can't get reparations and all that. And you know, Desmond Tutu's daughter, in an introduction to a book on reparations, she pointed out something quite important, because when they say, you know, too much time has passed, and here I'm going to read you what Desmond Tutu's daughter said, because if I say it, you may say I'm sacrilegious. So I'm going to read the words of Desmond Tutu's daughter. She said, the establishment of the state of Israel is based on biblical claims to that land as the homeland given by God to the Jewish people. It is a claim based on something that happened over 2,000 years ago. The same Western government that claimed slavery happened too long ago for compensation by people of African descent accept as legitimate the right of European Jews to claim land based on theological interpretations that happened even longer ago. So it is a question of how people are measured, whether you see there's a claim for reparations or not. So let's press on quickly now. Those of you who are Christian, you should go to the Bible, Deuteronomy 15, 12, 15. So if you want your justification for reparations from your spiritual belief, and it is Christian, it's in the Bible. Take note of the number so you could see it is true. If thy brother be sold unto thee and serve thee 6 years, Then in the 7th year, thou shalt let him go free, with us was almost 700. Thou shalt let him go free from thee. And when thou sendest him out free from thee, thou shalt not let him go away empty. Thou shalt furnish him liberally out of thy flock, and out of thy floor, and out of thy winepress, of that wherewith the Lord thy God hath blessed thee. Thou shalt give unto him. I command thee this thing today. So, brothers and sisters, we are on the right track, no matter what position you're coming from. And we are going to win the battle for reparations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kambon. That was an extremely, I don't know for you, but a very difficult listening for me. I was fortunate to have done history at school, so most of these things I would have known already, but somehow listening again and looking at especially conditions on the slave ship, it is difficult. But the obvious rightness of the need for reparations has been proven to us, and we now have an opportunity to ask questions of Mr. Kambon. And you just stand. Kyron, we have an extra mic? Okay, no extra mic. So you stand up and you address the question to... There's a mic? Okay. Okay, there's a mic there. So you go to the mic, identify yourself, and ask your question. And I'm taking the privilege as the host to ask the first question. So you referred to the Indian Ocean slave trade. I think I have heard Dr. Morgan Job talk a little bit about that in the past, but could you tell us a little more about that? Because I know, of course, of the transatlantic slave trade. I'm not so conscious of the Indian Ocean slave trade.
The way slavery was globally, where there were certain circumstances in which people became enslaved within their own cultures and were sold, mainly within their own cultures, but sometimes outside of it. But it was like a punishment for crime, because a lot of African societies didn't have prisons. They didn't have prisons. And sometimes the way of punishment was like that. And we talk about that Mali empire, and it's very interesting to look at that issue of slavery within the Mali empire, because the first constitution in the entire world is something called the Kurukan Fuba. It's not this, what's the British thing they still talk about, which is nonsensical compared to that. That's not even a constitution, it's an agreement. But a very sophisticated constitution that the society had, and it even had laws about the question of slavery. Well, we had in modern time interpreted as slavery and so on. And the flexibility where African society was, is that people rose to the level of the equivalent of governors who were considered slaves. So slave didn't take away your humanity. People rose from that status that has been called slave. You see, I think it has to do with how, because of our language, we get confused about these things, to become governors and even rulers within that Mali empire. So that it was a whole different, we're talking about something totally different. I think it's unfortunate the language is slave in how we interpret it, because clearly it is some servitude. There is a form of servitude. There were these forms of servitude, and which have been described as slavery. So we're dealing with totally different issues, really, between the transatlantic slave trade and the Indian Ocean slave trade, at least in the earlier times. Everything became vicious and cruel as the process advanced.
It's not really a question. This is an issue of, I think it was written by Rita Pemberton. It was written by Rita Pemberton. It questioned Tobago inaction to the decay of African people. Tobago inaction in the decade for people of African descent. It raises the question, 2 years into the decade, and still nothing hasn't been done in Tobago to address any of the aims of international decay, It is interesting to note that on the declaration, the UN set the pattern for others to emulate as unveiling and the arc of no return, a permanent memorial for the victim of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. Unfortunately, it has not been considered fitting to erect a monumental to the victim of enslavement in Tobago. Ironically, the one memorial that exists in Tobago was erected by and for the co-landers. We would be interested to know where the assembly is on this issue.
I don't know, is there any member of the assembly to address it? But I will comment on it after. Let me, yeah.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon,
everyone.
brother.
My name is Clifton Mackenzie. I'm not so much on a question, but I think I'm more on factual. You see, black people, or we, the black people, has brought into slavery, scattered, divided, conquered. But somehow we seems to lost our identity in the sense that the history books doesn't point direct to the people who has been in slavery. But if we read our Bible told us about one set of people who has scattered abroad to the four corners of the earth and has gone into slavery. I know that suit these people, our people, the people that we call African people. The word African is a modern day word. Africa was once called Ethiopia. The whole of Africa was Ethiopia. And Ethiopia was a Christian nation 100 years before Europe became a Christian nation. The people that has been into slavery were the children of Israel. We still don't want to acknowledge ourselves as Israelites. For today, we're still mimicking around. The education system, half of the story has never been told. And when the other half has been told, even for today, we in this, right here at this conference, and the name His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie has still not even mentioned. A man who has done so much for black people. We have singers who were before, as our Bible taught us, the singers went forth, the players and instruments. We had Bob Marley, we had all these reggae singers who singing and educating about reparation, repatriation, and the movement onward for the people who has been in slavery and interested people who have been on repatriation. Today, I really still not hearing the onward move or to where we meet from emancipation for today. Because emancipation, the Rastafarians had carried that movement far forward into the 20th century. We're still trying to mingle with different cultures and confusing the people head when we are the children of Israel. We are a spiritual people. We are a Christian nation. We've been into slavery. We are a Christian nation 100 years before Rome. It is high time that the schools bring forth the doctrine of Marcus Garvey, Selassie, and these great men who has fought the good fight for the movement and the reparation for the slave trade and the slave people. We are not guessing. We are on. For these few words, I give thanks.
My name is Eugene St. Louis. I'm asking you a question on reparation. I am happy to note that the CARICOM governments had established a CARICOM Commission on Reparation. Can you give us an update about that committee that was established in this country? Because since the coming of Kit Rowley's government, we have not been told anything. So give us an update, please.
At the midpoint of the International Decade for People of African Descent, governments around the world unanimously agreed that this period here, from 2015, would be known as the International Decade for People of African Descent. We are now in the 5th year out of that 10 years. Up to today, I have never heard anybody in government use the term International Decade for People of African Descent. And I don't belong to any political party, but as an African, I want to see whoever is in government, I want to see them looking at my interests. And to me, it is incomprehensible that I've never heard a single person since this decade has started make mention of it. And so I think we are in a bit of a crisis as a people where that is concerned. Because on the reparations committee specifically, when the last government went out of office, we debated among ourselves, what should we do? It was a cabinet-appointed committee on reparations, but it was in keeping with not a Trinidad and Tobago agenda, it is a CARICOM agenda. You have a regional reparations body, and each territory was mandated to set up committees. So it's part of a CARICOM agenda, and things go from one government to another, unless they go back to CARICOM and say, we have nothing to do with this. And the thing is that when the government changed, knowing you're a cabinet-appointed committee, people were saying, should we just resign or should we just offer our resignations? Because if a committee is appointed by cabinet, then the incoming cabinet has a right to change that. They could pick and choose from within the committee, they could dismiss the committee altogether, form another committee. We wanted to ensure there was continuity, so he said, you know what? We will write a letter making it clear that we are prepared to resign. But we'll just fill the gap until you decide. If you want to keep anybody, get rid of, you know. We made it clear that we were not trying to hold on to anything. We never received any response. The committee has never been able to meet with the Prime Minister up to now. We've sought several occasions to meet with him. One occasion he told the chairman of the committee to meet with Minister Hines. He met with Minister Hines, and since then nothing has happened. But the committee continues to meet. And when there's a CARICOM meeting, the chairperson of the committee, who is Ayegoro Ome, he would attend on our behalf. Sometimes we participate in teleconferences with the rest of it. But by and large, the committee has been abandoned. And it's unfortunate to abandon a reparations committee in the International Decade for people of African descent. It is something I feel very strongly about, and CARICOM has played a magnificent role, because you see the fact that governments got together and agreed to reparations, even if they do nothing else, it was a stimulation to the movement globally. Even in the United States, you know, things tend to be in a low ebb, that raised the thing up again globally, and it is sad to see it abandoned. But the committee still continues to meet, to function, but there's limits to what we can do with absolutely no resources and no indication of government's position on it. Well, I don't think a non-African could have done that. It would have been a different response.
Kind of embracing the whole slave trade. And I wonder about our behavior, that during the holidays, a lot of us are traveling to the north and spending our savings and our resources, as opposed to traveling to Africa, doing more south-south. So I just wanted your opinion on that, and that, you know, a terrible wrong has been done, but yet we are still, yes.
You look at our monuments in this country, right? Right now you have a whole movement trying to get rid of Columbus. You shouldn't need a movement for that. The man was a criminal. How could we celebrate him right in the heart of our city? And what is there in our city that affirms our presence as a people in a positive way? Look at a simple thing. We have been seeking to have Oxford Street in Port of Spain, right? I don't know who Oxford was. I don't know if it's just named after a street in London or there was a man called Oxford. I don't know. But you have an Oxford Street in Port of Spain, an international figure. Kwame Ture was born and grew up on that street until he migrated. Well, he didn't migrate voluntarily until his parents took him to the United States. And we are having a problem to get an agreement to rename, to take away a meaningless name and put a meaningful name. We put a plaque on the house. And do you know that when people come to this country, like African Americans and so on, they go to that site because a plaque is there, so they go to that because that is like sacred for them, given the role he played. So it is, we are in a terrible, as a people, we are in a terrible state. Right now, we are putting a request. The Treasury building in Port of Spain is where the Emancipation Proclamation was read in 1834. And we are now seeking to have a placard, not a placard, a plaque put up in front of that building. We will see what the response will be. And we ourselves are going to put up our own monument. We are looking to raise funds for it now at the eastern side of Port of Spain. You know, just as you pass the Columbus statue on your right and you're moving out of Port of Spain, there's a place called Yoruba Village Square. And next year, by Emancipation next year, you are going to see a massive monument right at that square, facing you as you leave Port of Spain.
Good evening, I'm Darian Phillips. And you spoke about this, well, okay, before that, let me do a little introduction. So I just finished Cape history. So yeah, that's why I'm kind of, you know, interested in the whole reparations movement. Yeah.
That's good.
You spoke about the CRC, which is the CARICOM Reparations Commissions, right? And you are aware that they issue a 10-point plan for reparations, right? Do you think that plan is a just and a feasible way of us receiving reparations? As well as my other question is that bodies like the EU and other European bodies have stated that they have somewhat granted reparations to us through, you know, their different scholarship opportunities and business grants and all these different
aid
things.
and all of that, right?
Yeah.
I think that CARICOM, I am in high in praise of CARICOM for taking the bold step that they did, given the way that the Europeans regard the issue of reparations. At the same time, there's some language that I can't in honesty subscribe to in the public, and I don't know. I know there's something that is named a 10-point plan that CARICOM has. And there are some good items in it, right? There are some good items in those 10 points. But to call it a plan is incorrect. And I wish I'd said, 10 pointers to reparations or something, but they called it that. So it is difficult for me to talk about a plan that, in my opinion, is not a plan. But there are items there, like, that could form part of a plan for reparations. And what was the second part again? Oh, yes. Well, you see, this is why it is important to combine the issue of reparations with self-repair. When they give you a grant, they are giving you a grant to do X or Y. Buy 2 red chairs or buy 2 blue chairs or something. And so they are giving you a grant to do that. They are still dictating. We are in a situation where our whole motive in life must be to come out from under the control and manipulation of Europe. Reparations is something that must put us back on our feet. We must go back to the Mansa Musa days where we are empowered. And anything that is not empowering cannot bear the name of reparations. And we have to be very clear about that. So you cannot mix up aid and grants and all of that with reparations because they determine what you should do. And the thing is that too many African governments, current African governments, and too many governments in the Caribbean and so on, and you see how they disrespect us, so that when Jamaica was calling for reparations, and who it was when there, who was the leader? Cameron went there, what he did, he gave them money to build a jail, so that when Jamaicans give trouble in England, they have a place to send them back to. I mean, that is total disrespect. He should have been run out of Jamaica for that. So we have to have self-respect in order to gain the respect of others. And reparations is when you are doing things for yourself. People give you billions of dollars, it's not going to help us. If it is not controlled, it is not, the program for that spending is not something that we have developed based on an analysis of our problems and our real needs, including our psychological needs. Outside of that, there's no reparations.
Couple of questions, but really quick ones, really quick answers most likely. You said that the French government would have passed a law,
The Tobago law.
acknowledged that human rights violations occurred, right? Which should have built the groundwork for
Crime against humanity is the terminology.
Right, crime against humanity.
Yes.
So crime against humanity, would that be tried in the International Criminal Court? First thing, wondering. And the reason why I'm asking that, first thing crossed my mind, because I wonder in A.N.R. Robinson, to my understanding, he would have, the International Criminal Court would have been his brainchild, right? That is the first thing. The who?
No, that's, yes, he it's something that he recommended.
Right. Okay, cool. Right, that being said, right? Part 2. Right, part 2. Tobago, right? To my understanding, we are the descendants of French slaves, French-controlled slaves, right? I do not know if Tobago was ever a French colony, and not for how long. I wouldn't have an idea of that. But I'm thinking that if you have the framework to demand reparations from a European power, right, and you have legitimacy in the form of being a descendant of French slaves from French colonies, because a large percentage of us would have been brought in from Haiti, etc., due to the revolution situation, right? Wouldn't we now have legitimacy to say bring it up to them?
Well, we have legitimacy to bring it up to all those who have controlled. And the thing, Tobago changed many hands, so Tobago should get plenty reparations. It's going to change many hands. What's that?
Tobago changed hands 32 times.
32 times, yes, that is phenomenal. Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is an extremely interesting topic, and I'm looking at the line there. So I'd like to make a suggestion that everyone comes up, you ask one question, confine yourself to one question, and ask the question. We have to try and step away from the commentary at this point in time, because time is running, and our guest speaker and his wife have to get back to Trinidad. Okay, right, so thank you. So.
I had a question regarding the second part, which was self-repair. And my question is, are you familiar with the work of Dr. DeGroy? And is there a reason why you didn't include her work on what she considers post-traumatic slave syndrome and the healing process that she recommends and has written and spoken extensively about, which I think would address the kind of pain that Ms. Boris Phillips and most of us feel at even addressing, and especially visually being confronted with that particular part of our history.
Between her style of writing and the content of what she wrote is really, I think, one of the most stimulating books in terms of that question of where the psychological damage is done and all of that. And she's an important person. I think there are a number of other people who have addressed it, like Wade Noble's been addressing it because Joy is a relatively young person, Dr. Wade Nobles, and I have had the pleasure to meet Joy as well. She came to Trinidad and did a lecture, and I went to the lecture. I was able to meet her. Dr. Wade Nobles is a person that we have brought to Trinidad to lecture, and he has been dealing a lot with this question of the self-repair as well. And he's a psychologist, and he's been dealing with it. And you have a few of our scholars who are really doing a lot of work in that area. And we should really familiarize our people with them and recommend the books and all of that. We should get a book list which we share among ourselves, and you have the Writers Guild here, could put together a list of books like that which can be recommended. It's very, very important. And we have to get the material into the school curriculum.
The name is Shane Andrews. All those that would have been complicit or directly involved in the enslavement of our foreparents, we here in the Caribbean, whatever, by today's standards, monetary value that they put or they would have calculated based on the lives lost or the labor value of the enslaved that came, or whatever criteria or criterion that they use to calculate it. And even though we do not get back the whole thing, maybe 3/4, 2/3, within the commission, is there a system/structure set up to decide or determine how that monetary value would be dispersed among the various Caribbean islands? Would it be based on size, or who would have had the most enslaved persons? Does the commission have such a structure in place? Because I know money has turned people foolish, right? And I just had to throw in the second question, although they said to confine it to one. The entire reparations movement, would it include, or would we be demanding reparations from those nations in the so-called Middle East? Because the reason why I asked that, I know prior to the transatlantic slave trade, 600 years prior to that, there was the trans-Saharan trade, where millions of our people were taken to build these so-called Arab states, and where the men in particular were neutered right, or castrated because for racist reasons, right? They were not good enough to, right? Right? So is the movement broad-based to the point where we will demand reparations from those Middle Eastern states? And of course, I want to answer to the first question that I've asked.
There is no structure in place at this time. Part of the work that needs to be done while fighting the battle, which I suppose everybody recognizes would be long-term, is for us to have a thorough analysis of our situation, our problems, and what we need to overcome. Now, the 10 points put out by the Caribbean, you know, looks at a number of specific things that need to be addressed. It is not comprehensive enough, but also because it's just pointers, there's no concept of structure where it is concerned. And it's part of the work that needs to be done by us and the people in charge. But the simple answer is, at this time, there is no structure in place, right? And maybe there are structures in the region already that, and this can't be just all in one. This has to go, because the problems are so multidimensional and complex that structures have to be developed for different regions. Because the Caribbean situation will be different from the North American, from the South American, and all of that. So it has to be done, I think, in regions that people have to develop those kinds of structures. It's a very important point, but no, there are no structures at this time.
Former political detainee and political prisoner of 1970. Before I make my contribution, I want to extend greetings to you, Brother Dabro. You may not remember me, but I remember you very clearly in 1970.
What's your name again, brother?
Duport Ewing.
Oh my Lord.
Duport Ewing.
I know that name, and I know
I was
Ewing,
hoping
yes.
I'll be able to hug you first when I come here tonight. However, I have quite a lot to say, but I first want to congratulate you for your effort in disseminating education on the issue of reparation, which is the first prerequisite if black people are to come forward as they are supposed to ensure that not only this shall become a success, but their freedom to become a success. Because I want to take the opportunity to remind all my black people here that the European crusaders of evil and plunderers are still continuing the efforts to enslave us, even though it was the labor power of our forefathers that is responsible for the development of all the world empires. We must therefore not forget that, and you should be congratulated. Because some of the history you refer to, I'm well acquainted with it, like the Day of No Return, the Korea Island, the Ghana, on the west coast of Ghana, that palace that was built there, where the ground flowers, the dungeon, where they kept our forefathers after bringing them through the jungle for over 6 months and chained them inside it, where the mothers, when they bring them with their babies, and they realize the cruelty to which the babies will be subject, bang their head on the wall and kill them and drop them inside there. And the black people should know all about this. Because remember, chattel slavery did not work. Don't forget. Industrial slavery did not work. Today, it is viruses. Viruses. And they are going to continue. Don't think they're going to stop. But what is very important is that you should use the initiatives to train cadres to continue the lectures not only here tonight, but in the entire length and breadth of the island of Trinidad and Tobago. So that if they kill you, as it is because you know this is what they do, you know. Although Napoleon Bonaparte was against us, they kill him too, you know that. Yes. And that fellow in Nigeria, they kill him too. Condoleezza Rice, she was what, Secretary of State for the colonies, for the Bush and them. We know all of this. And I would hope that the people can get all this information as education to be strong in the fight for reparation, because we deserve it. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. And Susan Rice, not Condoleezza. Susan.
Good evening. I am Deidre Prescott.
Thank you.
I just want all of us to focus for a second on the self-repair aspect, the healing, which is something that could happen without the invention of anybody else but ourselves. And for us to recognize the importance and that we have been scrambled, and we still are, from when they just take us and mix us all kind of how. Another thing we have to look at is what is our input in this whole thing. What traits do we have as a people that contributed? Because, well, you are there to say if I'm wrong, but it is not something that was done only to us. It was partially by the greed of some of us, which is still prevalent and still working against us up to today. And unless we start to look at ourselves, if we are truthfully looking to our future, we need to recognize the traits in us that have been used against us, and for us to start to repair ourselves in every way possible.
I suspect that what you are talking about has to do with the idea that, okay, Africans got involved in selling each other and all that. We could call a number of examples to show you how something develops and could develop in any society. And if you take the Congo, for example, one of the early places from which they started to get people. The Congo was a massive empire. It involved both Congos of today and extend much further into Africa. So when you think of Congo Empire, you're talking about a massive empire that embraced many different peoples, speaking different languages and all of that. And it is one of the few empires in history that was not built by conquest. It was built through negotiation and agreement. So it made it a very stable empire and all of that. But remember, you have individual human beings. They started to trade with the West, right? And all these societies, as I said, societies globally, because a lot of the people who were traded as slaves in the early days were Europeans. Europeans, there was a big European slave market long before there was a African slave market. And that is something that we should know. It's just that we become the last ones and we become the most massive one. But it is nothing that is strange to humanity. It's a common thing of all humanity, first to understand that. But to go back to the Congo example, what started to happen as they built a trading relationship with Europe is that Europeans who came to live in Africa started to build friendships because they had their goals. And once you're there in the land there, you begin to see who are the individuals that you can get into your embrace in a certain way. And for example, you go there and there are conflicts between Group X and Group Y. So what do? You have guns, which neither side has. And since there's a conflict between Group X and Group Y, you tell Group X, look, I'm going to help you solve this conflict. And I will give you guns to help you. But when you beat them, I want some human beings in return. And these are people who are in conflict with each other. And you make use of the conflicts. And that is what happens. Then there are some people who, the sale of human beings within a culture that didn't have jail walls and all that, and people were sold, like all cultures in the world at the time. This is something I can't emphasize enough. It happened in all cultures. And at the same time, you could corrupt you could corrupt individuals. And once you corrupt individuals, you create patterns that have a domino effect. So if Africans had gone to Europe and start to, because even when Africans went into Spain, right, from about the 7th century, when Africans went into Spain, you think they could have settled in Spain for centuries if they were not able to get Europeans on their side? It's, you know, so once you go in there and you learn and you begin to understand things and understand people, understand where the little conflicts lie and all that, you make use of it. So Africans did that in Europe. It's just that we were not out to enslave people and put them on plantations and treat them as Europeans did us. But we created the same divisions in Spain and were able to rule Spain for hundreds of years and other parts of Western Europe for hundreds of years. So we don't magnify these things in our minds. It's just that in Africa, things started to go downhill until it reached where it was. But it's great empires that were destroyed. Look at Mansa Musa, 14th century richest. They still consider him to be the richest man ever in the world because he was the emperor of a great African empire. And where is it today? It no longer exists. So we have to get out that stigma in our minds that something is wrong with our people. No, we're just normal human beings. We built great societies, great civilizations, but we still remain quite normal, and people could come and make us quarrel and divide us, just as we were able to go and make people quarrel and divide them. Our intentions were not as evil.
So my name is Ryan Allard. So I have a quick point and then a question. The point is that I was looking at some data a couple of years ago on what happened to the plantation owners in the Caribbean after slavery was abolished. And it turns out that the plantation owners were compensated.
Yeah, they got reparations.
Yes, they got reparations, exactly. In accordance with what's the estimated value of a slave in the Caribbean. And what's even more interesting is that it actually varied by island, because there was some estimates from the value of a man in Trinidad versus the value of a man in Tobago versus Barbados, etc., and the value of a woman, etc. And the British kept excellent records. All of that is available. And you can actually see what the value was back in the 1800s. So there's the idea of value there, which it didn't come out from my talk, but it actually is clearly an underlying element of this entire discussion, right? Reparations mean money. But I'd like us to discuss, perhaps building off the comment from the guy in the red there, what do you see as the actual use of that, right? So money is certainly going to be part of this, equate this part of the discussion here in the long run, if we get to the point of when we get to the point of reparations. But what do we actually do with that? What do you see as the individual types of programs or initiatives we need to build from that? And why I ask that is because there's actually enormous variance with the needs of African people and African descendants around the world, right? We have 40 million in the US, we have several million in the Caribbean, we have maybe 100 million in Brazil, we have 1 billion people in Africa. So these are varied people, very different backgrounds, very different effects of slavery. So based on the local context, in Trinidad and Tobago, what do you see as the types of needs we have that should come out of reparation financing, let's say, or reparations in order to help that self-repair process that we talked about? Thank you very much.
Any answer I give could be challenged because somebody would have a different idea as to what is critical and all of that. But since the purpose of reparations is that restoration to what it would be if you had not been under that yoke, we have to look at what are the things that still make us so dependent on Europe. And it can't be Trinidad alone. We have to be part of a wider region and part of a larger movement, because just money would automatically go into all the things. Somebody would say, okay, we need some hospitals. Obviously, we build the hospitals, and in 5 years' time, we can't maintain them. You know, we put on some more roads, then we can't maintain them. So that it has to be things that have to do with development, in the sense that it is development that can be self-perpetuating. I can only talk in general terms because this is something that needs good planning policy. So you have to look at putting ourselves on a course to self-sustaining development would be critical. and repairing our minds, changing the education system, changing the content of media, and all of that in ways that directly address the psychological problems that we have. I see I have to go. No, it's important. I have a plane to catch too.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Just reminding him of his flight.
Okay.
To the people who still have questions, could I make a suggestion? You write your question on one of the backs of the programs and put your email address. And Mr. Kambon will respond to you via email. Could you live with that? All right. And I am sorry to cut you off because it is after 8 o'clock now. I just realized that they are on a 9:45 flight. So we really need to wind up. Sorry, sir. Very, very sorry. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Yes.
All right.
All right. We now call on
yeah.
Okay, so I will also give him the email address of our president, and our president will find a way to get it to you.
All right.
To get it to most of the people here because we have a list.
Okay. I will just say one. Okay. I just one question. I was just dealing with the black psyche or the African psyche, because you don't ever have something like a mango descent, or if you're dealing with nutrition, a nutritionist will tell you a pawpaw have different components. So some people just quickly say, I am mixed with this and I'm mixed with this, but the overall title is a pawpaw. That's what I was just trying to deal with, the black or the African psyche, because I run into this all the time. They're trying to justify, okay, I'm a African descent. There is no such thing as African descent.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Ms. Gabrielle Fernandez will now do the vote of thanks. You have them right.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Tobago Writers Guild and Tobago Library Services, I would like to thank our speaker, Khafra Kambon. I would like to thank Khafra Kambon and the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago, of which he is the chair, for his stimulating, enlightening, and sobering presentation. I'd also like to thank Mrs. Kambon for pouring libations and explaining the significance of the tradition. Thank you. Thank you to the Mason Hall Village Council folk performers. Uplifting, most enjoyable. Thank you to Loy Warner of Penny Savers for his generous sponsorship. To the Tobago Festivals Commission for lending their support. To the media, TTT, Radio Tamarind, Tobago Channel 5, Insight with Deborah Moore Miggins, Rise and Shine with Brother B for helping us promote this event. To Kyron Reed of New Lens Media for technical assistance today and for videography. To our host, Laureen Burris-Phillip, all members of the Tobago Writers Guild and staff of Tobago Library Services who contributed to the program, and a very warm thank you to all of you for coming out to this evening's presentation. Thank you all.